Hey everybody, it's Anna. So I just wanted to offer you some thoughts on a Sunday afternoon in response to my husband's sermon passage this morning. The lectionary passage for this Sunday was the parable of the sheep and goats. And in case you don't know that parable, it's a story Jesus tells about a judgment scene where people are sort of brought before the king, and the king separates them according to who's the sheep and who's the goat. And the sheep people are described as those who responded lovingly and with compassion to those in need. If they were hungry or lonely or in prison or sick, if they took care, they responded to that need. Because as Jesus says, when you responded to any of these people in the world, you were actually caring for me. So those are the sheep, and they are rewarded by being, brought into heaven. The other group are the goats. And those are the people who did not respond with compassion when others around them were hungry or sad or lonely. And Jesus said, when you did not respond to those needs, you did not respond to me. And so now, you're kicked out. You're actually, in the Matthew passage, it says you're being thrown into eternal punishment, right? Okay, so that's the parable. My husband, his message is almost always about compassion and loving other people. So he leaned into that part of it. Like, it's about us recognizing the Christ in the world and responding in love with those people. And that is the nature of the true children of God, are those who respond with compassion. He didn't lean very hard into this, but the other piece is, if you don't do that, if you don't take care of other people, then, you're going to go to hell or, whatever. So that's the story. I just want to start off by saying that Jesus was a Jew, and Jewish people, I think even to this day, but definitely in Jesus' time, did not have a conception of hell. So when they're described, so the idea of hell and eternal damnation and punishment was probably added in from a Greek perspective when the scripture was redacted. Just so we're clear, that's not a Jewish concept, and Jesus was a Jew. That being said, so I'm always gonna take a little bit of I'm gonna take umbrage at the idea that Jesus is sending anybody to hell, because I don't think the concept of hell would have been part of his religious vernacular. Okay, but what does this parable, from my perspective, what does this parable show us? So if we look at the difference between the sheep and the goats are very sturdy creatures. They're quite resilient. They can eat anything. Like, I think a goat can eat like a tin can, I've heard. They're quite resilient. They're quite hardy. They don't get sick very much, and they're very self-reliant. So they're very independent sort of creatures. You can let a goat loose and it'll probably be fine, right? Now, sheep, on the other hand, are very reliant creatures. They're not that bright. They're very delicate, and when they need to eat and sleep, they need a lot of caretaking, because they don't seem to have a lot of internal instincts of how to protect themselves, or even necessarily how to care for themselves. And when I was in Ireland, I met a shepherd who talked about how sheep will just walk right off a cliff. They don't have any kind of sense of self-reliance. So you've got goats who are fairly independent, and sheep who are quite dependent. And the sheep, the dependent ones, are the ones that are the good ones, and the goats are the bad ones. So if we think about our instinct for independence, our instinct to be tough or to protect ourselves, that comes pretty early on in life when we discover the world isn't as friendly as we thought it was. So if we come to the world with sort of innocent, open eyes, then we get hurt. And this happens to everybody. Even if you have a really great childhood, everybody has the first moment of trauma where they realize, oh, pain exists. I can get hurt. Things can go wrong. And from that moment on, the mind begins to strategize to try to keep us safe. And so the mind will learn the stories of when we got hurt. We'll come up with a reason we got hurt. We'll come up with some kind of explanation for why we got hurt, and then start strategizing around the avoidance of that pain. And so the mind's getting us to be more goat-like, right? We want to survive. We're going to kind of solve our pain points by ignoring them or buffering them or avoiding them. Like, we're going to come up with a way to not get hurt in the world. thereby creating independence. And the reason that makes us independent is, for one, because we're kind of relying on our own strategy, but also because we are cutting ourselves off from experiences that might harm us. The mind is now looking out at the world as a hostile environment and identifying where hostility is coming from, and is deciding where we will be open and where we will be closed, right? Because it doesn't think we are safe anymore. And so that's goat energy, right? So it naturally begins to close us down. It shuts us down. What it's really doing is shutting us down to our own pain. We don't want to feel pain. We don't know what to do with it. We don't like it. We're going to stop feeling our pain, but that also means we're going to stop feeling compassion and connection with other people, because those are connected. So you've got this sort of strategy the mind has of protecting itself. And that actually is where you get triggers, right? When people talk about being triggered, what they're describing is a pain point that's unresolved, and the mind has a response to that. It could be they fight, it could be you run, it could be whatever it is. But in the moment we are triggered, we are no longer receiving data from the outside world. We are now internally focused. We are in the middle of a strategy to respond in a way that at least the mind feels will keep us safe. That means we are not really fully available in the world anymore. And that's also when Jesus talks about the goats, they are people who did not respond to other people with compassion, right? Other people were in pain, they were hurting, they were in need, but these goat people did not recognize it. And actually, that's what they say. Well, when Jesus says, well, you didn't take care of these people, they said, where were these people? Because they're not even seeing these people, because they're already their defenses are constructed in such a way that they're not even allowing their own pain. They're not even engaging their own pain, so they're certainly not going to engage the pain of others. So that is goat energy, right? And it comes from a position of protection and of fear and scarcity. So this is a normal development in a human life. This is not a failure of a human. This is not a failure. This is what we go through. Okay, so you kind of develop that goat response, I would say, your teen years, and you kind of get your strategies in place. At some point, some of us decide that it's too limiting to be in that place. We can feel our calling is asking us to do something a bit risky, a bit more exposing. And so we have to solve these pain points. We have to get in there and start clearing out some of the trauma so that our mind will stop shutting us down every time we get in the world. We're trying to move in the world. We're trying to express something. The mind shuts us down because it gets triggered and we have to kind of pull back and start all over again, right? So that uses up a lot of time and a lot of energy. So we need to start clearing out our personal trauma so that the mind is no longer reactive. And I think that's what the spiritual journey is. It's us beginning to kind of release our goat nature, to stop protecting ourselves and defending ourselves and start opening to the world and to ourselves. We want to open up the places in our lives where the trauma is so it can be healed, it can be released. And then the people around us, the world doesn't seem so hostile anymore because the hostility that we were perceiving was our internalized experience. So the spiritual journey goes on. Let's say you're doing your healing work and you're doing all good stuff. You're feeling better and better. And you get all of your personal trauma cleared, which, by the way, is totally possible. Okay? It's totally possible. And yet, there's still a pain point. That's sort of your existential crisis. And that never clears. And that's really important because it took me a while to realize that myself in my own journey. I always thought, well, eventually I'll get to the point where there's no pain points left. And I kept going for that until I finally realized there is the pain point, which is the human wound, right? The human wound is the place inside of us that never heals, where your calling flows from, right? You came to the world in order to carry this particular wound because this is your gift in the world. That means once you cleared all the personal trauma, you are still carrying the existential human wound. And the mind needs to get that because otherwise the mind will keep trying to solve it. Like the mind's like, why can't I clear this thing? And you'll notice if you're a creator, or really if you do anything that's your calling, as you're in the calling, you're doing the thing that you're called to do and you're meant to do, you feel soothed in the moment. You can feel like, oh, you feel relieved, you feel good about it. But then the pain comes back. And the mind's like, oh, what am I doing wrong? It seems like it didn't work. And then maybe you'll do it some more, or maybe you'll try something else because that's not solving the problem. So your mind's sort of thinking it's trying to solve a problem and it feels like it's failing. until the mind realizes, hopefully at some point, the mind understands that the reason this isn't clearing isn't because the mind's failing to solve a problem, but because you are built to carry this wound. And at some point, we have to agree to it. This is what it means to be on the planet. This is where the gift comes from. There's this lovely story about the Holy Grail, which is the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper, the Last Communion with his disciples. And so in the Middle Ages, there was a quest for the Grail. Monty Python did a movie about it too, but they're looking for the Grail, and the story is that the Grail is the cup of healing. So if you find the Grail, you get the cup of healing. And I don't know much about the story. I've just heard it retold. But there's a story how this one fella, this one knight, finds the Holy Grail. He takes it home with him, and it turns out it doesn't heal him. Because he has the Grail, he can use it to heal others, but he cannot heal himself. So the carrier of the Grail is the one who carries healing on behalf of humanity, but they themselves are not healed. Because the wound they hold, the wound they are carrying is the Grail. So the place out of which we create and we love and we dream and we bless the world is the wound that we are carrying. And if we agree to the wound, that means we agree to sort of never being fully healed, never really being protected, then we are stepping into the sheep nature, which is trust. The sheep can do nothing but trust, because it really doesn't have any way of defending itself or providing for itself. It really is sort of casting itself on the mercy of a good shepherd. That's what it means to be in your sheep nature, is to say, you know what, I'm not saving any resources as tools to protect myself or defend myself. I'm not even really able to plan for the future. I'm just agreeing to being this instrument of healing in the world and kind of putting all my energy into that, and then letting myself be cared for by the shepherd. And so it is a radically vulnerable position, which is also, as the paradox shows, is also power. It's also radically powerful, because there is no scarcity. There's no fear in this model. It is all faith. It is all love, and is all expansion. Being in love and expansion is not being in bliss. Sometimes it is, but it's about agreeing to the pain of the gift that's coming from you. And I think anyone who's a creator, who's done any time creating or evoking or manifesting things, will know that feeling. Your mind has a theory that once you get the thing you manifest, the pain goes away. So you manifest it. Pain doesn't go away. It soothes for a bit, and then it comes right back. So agreeing to that pattern, you are not here to be in bliss all the time. You are not here to be in no pain. You're here to hopefully to get rid of all the incidental pain you have, or the incidental wounds, because those are just draining to your energy. You do need to get rid of your own traumas and stuff. I think that makes things a lot easier. But ultimately, you are here to carry the wound. You are built to create. You are built to carry. And from that place, you are compassionate. You do move in love. You do move in power. And so that will show up based on what your calling is. So I was thinking the other day about how, when you feel inspired, whatever that looks like, if that's inspired to reach out to somebody, if that's inspired to have a friend, if that's inspired to create, whatever the inspiration is, if we can understand it as my inspiration is not about my own healing. It is my response to someone else calling for healing. The reason I create a painting is not because it will heal me, because it will soothe me and it will feel good while I'm doing it, but it won't heal me. But it will heal someone else in the world. And that's what I'm here to do. It's also important to realize that we are receiving healing all the time. And I think anybody who thinks about it for any length of time will see that. Like, I might sing a song and it heals somebody else, but I hear a song and that heals me. So this is kind of this radical connection of openness, which is what I think the sheep are. They are a flock. They're not individuals just running by themselves. They're a flock, and they're cared for by a shepherd. And so together they create this community of connection and love and possibility. And I think that in the judgment, what we're seeing is kind of the purging of the ways. Like, when we die, judgment happens, once your life is over, right? And when I was in seminary, I was in a course called Death and Dying, and we read about all these different traditions around death. And I can't remember if it was Buddhist, but there was an Eastern tradition which talked about judgment. And it was really lovely because it said when you die, you come into this place of judgment, and your life lays out before you like a spider web, and you can see all the connections. You can see all the good you did, and all the repercussions of that good, which go far beyond what you realize. All these effects in the world for your goodness. And you see all the places where, you acted in fear or anxiety or anger. And you see that spider web. And they are separated. And the web of your fear is released. And what is left is the web of your love, which makes sense because the web of fear, all the actions of fear and scarcity are explicitly connected to the physical realm. That's what happens being a creature on the world, right? On the earth, where survival is an issue. When your life is over, that stuff just is like chaff. It just blows away like chaff because it doesn't have any everlasting power. But what you were able to do in love, what the healing that you brought, the connections you made, the expansion you made, your willingness and sacrifice in carrying this wound, that's where the gold is. And that's the dross is removed and the gold is left. And so what continues on forever are these acts of gold, these acts of being a sheep. So the goats, the independent, strong-willed, tough goat is released because it was only really part of the physical world anyway. And the sheep, which is the holy fool, the act of vulnerability, the willingness to be vulnerable, to carry pain, and to love in that pain, that is where all the power is, and that goes on forever. So those are my thoughts about the parable of the sheep and the goats today. See you next time. Bye.